Warcraft has taken on a number of forms in and out of the RTS over the years, but what it would tackle next would prove to be its biggest undertaking of all. The universe would trade away its small band of troops only to receive a world militia in return. One wouldn't have guessed it then, but when Orcs and Humans treated players to its cryptic opening, it was a prelude of things to come.
Drums of war thunder once again.
The term MMORPG, or Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, wouldn't be coined until fantasy maven Richard Garriott put his stamp on it with 1997's Ultima Online. But in reality, the genre's history had roots even back in the days of disco. The summer of '73 plunged players in a Maze War, a multi-user first-person romp on the MLAC PDS-1, which brought the concepts of persistent virtual worlds, visually represented player avatars, and most importantly, network play to life. 1985 would trade passageways for peninsulas with the CompuServe RPG Islands of Kesmai, while AOL would have an adventure of its own with the graphical Neverwinter Nights in 1991. The mid-90s would see the genre take its baby steps towards immersion with The Realm Online, 3D with Meridian 59, and mass popularity with Ultima. But it wouldn't be until 1999's EverQuest that the genre would level up to the massively multiplayer construct played today, defining many modern concepts of the genre, along with its stigmas. The MMO had finally found its Moses, but its commandments were carved by the hardcore. EverQuest, however, isn't the topic of this tale. It's about Legacy of Steel, one of the game's top-rating guilds. Its leader at the time, Ariel, was too busy to handle the day-to-day dealings of the guild, so the reins were handed off to Tiggle, the second-in-command. Over time, the two would maintain contact and share ideas about improving the deep, but ultimately flawed game they played, until finally, the time came for them to put their money to the test. As it turns out, Ariel was none other than Rob Pardo, and he would go on to recruit Tiggle, now known to us as Jeff Kaplan, to help design the game dreamt up in those chat logs so long ago. After nearly 5 years of careful planning and testing alongside the development of Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos, World of Warcraft made its debut on November 23, 2004, a full 10 years after Orcs and Humans first assaulted diskettes in the 90s. Pardo, who shared co-lead designing duties with Alan Adam, collaborated with Kaplan and a number of other designers in shaping the vision of Azeroth. Tom Chilton had done previous work with Ultima Online, while Alex Afrasiabi came from the influential and sometimes controversial Fires of Heaven Guild. 4 years after the events of the Frozen Throne, the flimsy bonds that united the Alliance and Horde had since dissolved, bringing about old grudges and inflicting new wounds in the process. The game set the precedent for a conflict unlike any the world of Azeroth had seen, and it would demand a world stage for its events to play out. The hardcore shell of the MMO would be a tough nut to crack, but the team was equipped with a toolbox of ideas. At the end of the day, accessibility for both the hardcore and casual stood as the forefront of Blizzard's design philosophy, and it would come to define World of Warcraft as a whole. In Pardo's own words, players didn't necessarily need to know the lingo. We're going to teach them all that. Education started at the very beginning. After drawing straws with realm selection, players were thrust into the character creation process with a number of options encompassing gender, race, class, and appearance. The races drew from Azeroth's established stock. Alliance players could choose from humans, night elves, gnomes, and dwarves, while the Horde players selected from orcs, trolls, Tauren, and Sylvanas' newly reformed undead. The classes were Blizzard's take on classic MMO tropes, but they each had their own identities. Rage, accrued in battle, fueled the warrior's efforts, while a combo point system akin to Diablo II's Assassin class provided the blueprint for the rogue's offense. Priests found themselves more self-sufficient with the aid of offensive shadow magic, while mages could conjure up a number of tricks to dish out the damage and food. The pet-based hunters were masters of tracking and traps, druids the jack of all trades, and warlocks, fell magic, and demonology. Rounding out World of Warcraft's roster of classes were the paladin and shaman, hybrid classes that were previously specific only to their respective factions, but have since found homes on both sides of the struggle. After the finishing touches to the character were set, players were ejected to one of 6 starting locations where they would pick up on the basics of the game. Quests were established early on as a central means of progression, earning player characters a tidy sum of experience points with each turn-in. With enough XP, characters would level up, bequeathing an increase in stats and a set of new skills to learn through skill trainers situated at cities and towns. Inevitably, each zone's clusters of quests would lead players to a 5-man instance to complete. With the Alliance's Westfall as the template, many other areas in the game would follow its example, setting up a flow of zone progression that was quick, fun, and painless. And if that rabid boar happened to get the best of you, the penalties of death weren't quite as severe as other games. Players were back on their feet in mere minutes. Once the player was ready to stretch their legs outside of the sandbox, travel, in the form of boats, trains, and flight points, allowed quick transit around zones, chopping down needless runaround, as well as the zone-loading borders prevalent in many other MMOs at the time. If players needed to get back to town, quick transport was only a Hearthstone's throw away. By the player's 20s, their character would have accumulated a number of skill points to invest among 3 different talent trees for their class. If World of Warcraft were a website, this would be its personality test. What sort of build you spec'd into to find your playstyle in the game, and to a greater extent, the role that you would play in parties. Team play would also come into effect around this time as an essential part of the experience, either through completing difficult group quests, or for running instances to score XP and fat loot along the way. With team play came the social aspect of the game. Socializing through general chat and at the old meeting stones often brought about the formation of parties and the occasional guild invite, though now the process is streamlined somewhat by built-in functions to whittle out like-minded adventurers. And of course, what would socializing be without a little dancing? A player in their 30s would then begin to realize that money makes the world go round, or at least makes it zoom by really fast on the back of a mount. To save up pennies for the mount and riding training, players took up gathering or crafting professions to sell their wares in the auction house. Making ends meet through picking herbs or mining ore wasn't all that uncommon, and it was entirely worth it. Once you strutted your stuff on your new 4-legged friend, it was considered by many as the game's rite of passage. At the eve of a player's 40s, the game was well into approaching its endgame stretch. Azeroth's remaining instances would eventually grow increasingly elaborate in design, culminating in the serpentine labyrinths of Blackrock Depths. Though not the last of instances leading up to 60, its intricate layout, multi-directional paths, and sheer size set the tone for the raids to follow. Blizzard may have made a few concessions toward newcomers, but the team wasn't quick to forget about its roots. When players finally cleared the final hurdle leading to level 60, there were a number of hardcore raids waiting for them at the top of the hill. One of the first was Molten Core, a 40-man undertaking that took place in the fiery chasms of Blackrock Mountain. Here, many of EverQuest's influences came pouring through. Packs of elite trash mobs stood as murderous obstacles leading to each daunting boss encounter, which was no walk in the park itself. Elsewhere, single boss encounters like Onyxia tested wits and coordination with uniquely scripted behaviors and stage-like phases. World of Warcraft's Endgame proved to be just as intense as any other, pushing many of its players to go back to the drawing board time and time again, until their strategies were honed to a seamless battle plan. Down the line, Blizzard would only add to the scope of its encounters, with additional downloadable raids packaged with its content patches. With every successive increase in difficulty came a new epic tier set to go with it, a leapfrogging effect that would allow guilds to go up the food chain as long as their gear was up to it. But for some, raiding proved to be an undesirable path for those with less time to commit to the game. Introduced in patch 1.4, the PvP honor system allowed players to rack up honor points and rank by slaying players on the opposite faction. With enough notches on your belt, players could purchase gear with gold comparable to what dropped in high-end raids. The system provided an interesting means for the more casual crowd to compete, but it was merely the foundation. At the time, PvP was almost entirely player-run, with no backing structure to funnel the fight into one place. All that changed with the advent of patch 1.5, which put the now famous PvP battlegrounds into effect. Similar in concept to popular match types like Capture the Flag and King of the Hill, battlegrounds allowed honor to come in droves and turn the organized chaos of PvP into a well-oiled machine. But the system wasn't without its faults. The incredulous honor grind proved to be just as demanding as raiding itself, taking months just to get pieces of the set at a time. In time, however, PvP would grow as a viable endgame activity with less stringent requirements. Later patches would add cross-server play, additional battlegrounds, better gear sets, and a number of tweaks to keep the system as fair as possible. Eventually, the honor system would give way to a new philosophy that treated the points more as a separate currency than as a prerequisite for buying equipment, putting an end to rank grinding. But every once in a blue moon, a ghost of the past would make their rare appearance in town, sporting that elusive title of Seasons Long Gone. The impact that World of Warcraft had on the genre was felt immediately. For the first time, a mainstream MMO gave its players the means to adapt, play, and enjoy the game as they saw fit, unhindered by high ceilings, glacial grinds, or unreasonable learning curves. But at the same time, it also allowed hard-boiled vets to test their mettle in environments that changed by the month, and with frequent tweaks, the metagame was always shifting. Patches of new content covering zones, instances, loot, world holiday events, and features were dealt out in alarming regularity. Other games would have warranted an expansion for such content. World of Warcraft made it free. And the team's credo of accessibility permeated all facets of play, affecting even the way the game could be viewed, with client-side UI customization and add-ons to enhance the experience. The bar set by EverQuest was usurped by a new world power, and its influence would only continue to grow. On January 16, 2007, Blizzard rolled out the carpet on World of Warcraft: The Burning Crusade. As the first official expansion for the game, Burning Crusade introduced a new world zone, raised the level cap to 70, and introduced new races, the Draenei and Blood Elves. The reemergence of the Burning Legion cast aside old quarrels once again, and a new war erupted in the shattered realm of Outland. Players received new spells, talents, and gear to bolster the war effort, as well as took to the skies with the aid of the Flying Mount. Battles raged on in the new Eye of the Storm battleground, while several world PvP zones reimagined the borders of combat. A new profession, jewel crafting, brought a newfound source of fortune, and an increased emphasis on reputation had players playing diplomat with other factions. In an interesting paradigm shift, raiding inherited some casual elements, while PvP took on a more hardcore appeal. Raids cleaved player caps and completion times in half, while the arena system provided fiercely competitive grounds for 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and 5-on-5 combat. Later patches would send players racing against Illidan and Kil'jaeden, as well as new seasons of PvP gear to keep blades sharp and fingers clicking, until the inevitable boat ride to Northrend. In 2007, World of Warcraft: The Burning Crusade sold a record-setting 2.4 million copies within the first 24 hours of its release, making it the fastest-selling PC game to this day. It is indisputably the most played MMORPG of all time, and at the rate it's going, the upcoming expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, won't be long to follow. World of Warcraft will be remembered in the annals of video game history as a full-blown phenomenon, played the world over by fans spanning every race, culture, and age group. Reaching the rare status of pop culture fandom, it's taken on a new life outside of the game, in machinima, comics, toys, cards, novels, and even television.
World of Warcraft, I need to play!
World of Warcraft?
I don't play World of Warcraft.
I have never met a woman this into World of Warcraft.
It's a silent passion of mine.
That's how you two met online?
Butters, go buy World of Warcraft, install it on your computer, and join the online sensation before we all murder you.
Oh, all right then.
It's parodied and revered all the same by the people that play it. And for most, Azeroth has very much become a home away from home. As of October 28, 2008, World of Warcraft has reached over 11 million subscribers in all its territories, equaling nearly half the population of Australia. While a bit shy of the 6 billion inhabitants of planet Earth, Blizzard's been known to think big. Perhaps someday, the World of Warcraft will truly live up to its name. As our look at the past comes to an end, we take one last glance at a world of history, spanning planets, continents, and people 10,000 years in the making.